You scrub in. Your hands aren't shaking. They should be. The OR is cold. It always is. But tonight, something else is cold, and it's sitting directly below your sternum, right where your ribs meet. The attending is already inside. He looks up at you above his mask and says 3 words. "You're taking over." You don't say anything. You step to the table. You look down at the chest cavity in front of you. You look at the face above it, and your whole body goes very still. Because the man on this table is the man who destroyed your life. His name is Daniel Voss. You've known that name for 6 years. You've said it in the dark, in arguments with yourself, in conversations you rehearsed and never had. Right now, he's in hemorrhagic shock from blunt thoracic trauma. His spleen is ruptured. There's blood pooling in places it's not supposed to pool. His pressure is 74/40 and falling. Without you, he has maybe 20 minutes. The attending is already moving toward the door. His kid is in pediatric ICU 2 floors up. That's why you got the call at 3 a.m. That's why you're here. "You've got this," he says, and he's gone. You stand there for exactly 3 seconds. The scrub tech says, "Doctor." That's all it takes. 3 seconds, 1 word, and your training kicks in the way it always does. Like a circuit breaker flipping back on. You say, "Let's get his pressure up. Push 2 units FFP and start the massive transfusion protocol. I need visualization on that splenic hilum." Your voice sounds completely normal. You don't know how. Because in your peripheral vision, just past the draping, is his face. That face. The one you last saw 3 years ago across a conference table, in a room with lawyers and depositions and HR representatives. The one that didn't flinch when they read out what he'd done. You find the bleeding vessel, and you have a thought that you will never say out loud to anyone. You have a thought that lasts maybe 2 seconds. A thought about what it would feel like to hesitate. Not for long, just long enough. You clamp it. You repair it. You keep going. 45 minutes ago, you were asleep. You'd been asleep for maybe 90 minutes when your phone rang. You saw the hospital number the way you always do, and you registered it the way you've trained yourself to register it, as neutral data. Not good, not bad, just a call. The attending explained the situation in under a minute. Trauma, splenic rupture, hemorrhagic shock, family emergency pulling him out. He needed you to take the hand off. He knew you were on call. He said he was sorry to pull you in at this hour. You said it was fine. You said you'd be there in 15 minutes. The whole drive over, you thought about a paper you'd been drafting. A methodology question you hadn't resolved. The kind of thinking that fills the space between waking up and becoming a surgeon. The 20 minutes in a car before the role takes over completely. You didn't think about who was on the table. You didn't know yet. You found out at the badge scan, his name on a screen, Daniel Voss. And something landed in your chest that was not quite a feeling and not quite a thought. Just a recognition that the night had become a different kind of night. You met Daniel Voss on your first week as an attending at Mercy General. He was chief of surgery. The kind of chief who remembered your name before you'd introduced yourself, who made rounds at 6 a.m., and somehow made it feel like a privilege to be included. You trusted him? Not naively. With the kind of trust you build slowly, through years of watching someone make hard calls and make them well, he was the one who pushed your research. He put your name on the paper when he didn't have to. He wrote the recommendation that got you the fellowship. When you had a complication in the OR, the kind that follows you home and wakes you up at 2 a.m., he was the one who sat with you afterward, his office, door closed, told you what it meant to carry a death without letting it carry you. You thought you understood who he was. But then you found out what he'd been doing to Dr. Karim. Nadia Karim was a third-year surgical resident, brilliant and methodical in a way you rarely see. She was also the person Daniel Voss had been systematically undermining for 2 years. And it was never dramatic. That's the thing about this kind of damage. It was quiet. An evaluation marked just low enough. A case pulled at the last minute, no explanation. A recommendation letter that never got written. She left medicine entirely, Not a transfer, not a leave of absence. She walked away and didn't come back. You didn't know any of it until she told you herself over the phone 3 months after she was gone. And you'd been the one every week telling her that Voss believed in her. You're keeping him alive. The question you haven't asked yourself yet is whether you're doing this because you want to, or because your hands don't know how to do anything else. There's something strange about standing in an OR at 3 a.m. with someone you hate. Not hate the way you hate a bad film or a delayed flight. Hate the way you hate someone who caused real irreversible damage to a person who didn't deserve it. The kind of hate that has done laps in your chest for 6 years without finding a place to land. And yet your hands are moving. Your voice is steady. You are, by every measurable standard, taking excellent care of this man. If someone walked into this OR right now, they would see a skilled surgeon focused entirely on saving a life. They would be correct. 40 minutes in, his pressure is 94/62 and holding. You've controlled the primary bleed. Now you're looking at the bowel, and there's a mesenteric tear you didn't see on the scan. Secondary injury, you say. Mesenteric? I need a lap pad and better light. The tech moves without being asked. That's how you know a team is good. Nobody waits to be told the obvious. You've worked with this team for 3 years. They have no idea what they're actually watching tonight. To them, this is a Saturday night trauma. A John Doe brought in from a highway accident. Badge scan confirmed his name after he was already under. They don't know what you know. You work on the mesenteric injury, and you think about the HR hearing. You think about sitting in that room and watching Daniel Voss answer questions in that measured, cooperative voice, the one that sounded like a man who took these things seriously, the one that sounded like accountability. What actually happened was this. He admitted to communication failures. He agreed to sensitivity training. He accepted a formal letter in his file. Nadia Karim was still gone, working in pharmaceutical sales in Phoenix. That's what you'd heard anyway. The letter was removed from his file 18 months later. Standard procedure. He was named Chief of Staff 7 months after that. You finished the repair on the mesenteric tear. The field looked clean. No bleeder you'd missed, no tension on the closure. The scrub tech says, "Nice work." You don't respond. Because you just thought of something that's been sitting at the back of your mind for the last 20 minutes, and you finally let yourself think it all the way through. You could have refused. When the attending called, you could have said you had a conflict. You didn't have to be specific. You could have flagged it and let the on-call resident handle the first hour until another attending arrived. You didn't. You came in, scrubbed up, and took the case. You're trying to figure out what that means. Here's something you've never told anyone. In the weeks after the HR hearing, after you understood what had happened to Nadia and what wasn't going to happen to Daniel Voss, you did something that you're still slightly ashamed of. You went through 6 years of your career, and you tried to find the moments where you'd benefited from him. The fellowship recommendation came through him. The co-authorship was partly his doing. The early cases he assigned you in your 3rd year. The ones that built your confidence when confidence was the thing you were shortest on. All of it came through him, and you asked yourself whether you would have gotten where you are without his support. You asked yourself honestly, the way you ask things when you're alone and you don't have an audience. The answer was probably yes, but it would have taken longer and felt harder, with a lot more doubt in the middle. Which means you got something from him, and Nadia Karim lost something to him, and those two things happened at the same time, and you didn't know, and you kept going. You've never been able to fully separate your career from his fingerprints. That's the part you sit with. The mesenteric repair is holding. The anesthesiologist calls out that his pressure is improving, 98/66. Getting there. You ask for updated blood counts. The circulating nurse reads them back. His hemoglobin is coming up. The transfusion is working the way it's supposed to work. His body is fighting to stay alive, and yours is helping it. There's a point in any long surgery where the adrenaline of the first hour settles into something steadier, where your brain, no longer fully occupied by crisis, starts having thoughts you didn't invite. You think about whether Daniel Voss knows who operated on him. He will, eventually. Your name will be on the op note. Your name will be in the chart. When he wakes up, someone will tell him that he came in critical, and there was an emergency attending change, and the surgeon who took over was you. You try to picture his face when he finds that out. You've been picturing it for about 15 minutes, and you keep getting it wrong. Your brain keeps giving him an expression he probably won't actually have. Something like gratitude or guilt, or some combination of the two that would feel like the universe had made a kind of sense. But you know Daniel Voss, you know how he processes things, and what you know is that he will find a way to absorb this that doesn't require him to feel differently about himself. He will be grateful, and he will mean it, and nothing else will change. The scrub tech changes out an instrument. The rhythm of the room continues. Somewhere outside this building, the city is quiet at 4 a.m., and nobody knows what's happening in here. The last time you saw Daniel Voss in person, you were standing in the lobby of this hospital. He was coming out of an elevator. You were going in. He saw you. He stopped. He almost said something. You watched him decide not to. You watched him walk toward the parking structure, and you stood there for probably 10 seconds, thinking about every version of that conversation you'd rehearsed. The confrontational one. The cold one. The one where you said exactly the right thing, and he had no answer. None of them happened. He left. You went upstairs and scrubbed in for a cholecystectomy at 4 p.m. That's what surgeons do. You compartmentalize, you close off the part of your mind that holds the anger and the grief and the 10-second lobby conversation, and you go do the job. What you've never decided is whether that's a skill or a flaw. Because here's what you know about Daniel Voss that nobody talks about in the hallways. He's also one of the finest technical surgeons you've ever seen. You hated learning that. You checked a few years after everything out of something that felt like spite. You pulled his outcomes data, his complication rates, his mortality numbers. They were exceptional. Still are. The man who dismantled Nadia Karim's career is also the man who has saved hundreds of lives with those hands. You've never been able to hold both of those things at the same time without one of them winning. His pressure is 101/68. He's stabilizing. You're winning, which means he's winning. You have about 20 minutes left in this case, and you realize you've been waiting for yourself to feel something specific this whole time. You're still waiting. Here's a thing they teach you in medical school that sounds like a platitude until you've actually been in the room. The patient on the table is not a person. Not in that room, not during that hour. They teach you this for a reason. Because surgeons who see a person, a full, complicated human being with a history and a relationship to you and moral weight, those surgeons hesitate. And hesitation in an OR costs lives. So you learn to see a chest cavity, a mesenteric tear, a blood pressure reading. You learn to see the problem, not the person. But here's the part that doesn't make it into surgical training manuals. What happens when you already know the person on the table? When they've been living in your head for 6 years? When you've had imaginary arguments with them? When you've lain awake thinking about justice and fairness and whether the world is the kind of place where people like him actually face consequences? The world turned out not to be that place. And yet, the scrub tech asks how you're doing. It's 4:20 a.m. She's been on since 11. Fine, you say. Almost there. You close the mesenteric repair. You check the field twice. No active bleeding. The lap pad count comes back correct. His pressure has been holding above 100 for the last 12 minutes. You're going to close. And you're standing here realizing something that you don't have a word for. You saved him the same way you save anyone. No hesitation you noticed, no dramatic pause over the instruments, the same efficiency, the same focus, the same standard of care you give every patient who comes through those doors. You're trying to figure out if that makes you noble, or if it makes you something more unsettling, because you didn't choose to save him. Not really. The choice happened before you were even aware it was a choice. When the attending called and you got in your car and drove to the hospital at 3 a.m., the decision was already made. You just didn't know what you were deciding yet. Your hands saved him, your training saved him, some version of you that lives below the place where anger and justice and memory live. That version showed up and did the job. Is that the best version of you? Or is that a version of you that doesn't know what things are worth fighting for? You think about a conversation you had once with a colleague who'd been through something similar. Not the same situation, but the same structure. Someone they knew professionally, someone they had complicated feelings about, ended up needing their help. She told you she'd made the clinical decision first and had the emotional reaction afterward. She said the emotional reaction lasted about 6 weeks before settling into something she could live with. You asked her if she regretted it. Not the decision, the emotion. Whether she wished she'd felt differently. She said, "I don't think what I felt is the point. The point is what I did." You've thought about that a lot since. Whether she was right, whether the doing is separate from the feeling, or whether eventually, if you do something long enough, the feeling catches up. Nadia Karim is in Phoenix. She's not coming back. She'll never operate again. And that damage is permanent in a way that no career setback to Daniel Voss will ever touch. Daniel Voss is going to wake up in recovery in about 4 hours. He's going to be sore for 6 weeks. He's going to have a scar on his abdomen, and he's going to go back to being chief of staff. You're 30 seconds from closing, and there's something you haven't let yourself fully think yet, something sitting just past the edge of the question of whether you're a good person. It's this. What if the reason you didn't hesitate wasn't ethics? What if it was pride? What if some part of you wanted to be the surgeon who saved his worst enemy, not for him? Not even for the oath, but because you wanted to know you could, because you needed to prove something to yourself about the kind of person you are, and he happened to be the one on the table. If that's true, you didn't make a noble choice tonight. You made a self-serving one that happened to have a good outcome for someone who didn't deserve your best work. You don't know if that's true. You're not sure you'll ever know. And that uncertainty is probably the most honest thing about this entire night. You called her, once about 2 years after she left. You weren't sure what you were going to say. She picked up. You said you were sorry. Not for what you'd done, because you hadn't done anything, and that was part of it. You were sorry for what you hadn't seen. For the months you'd spent reassuring her about a man you trusted without enough scrutiny. She said, "It's okay. I know you didn't know." Then she said something you've thought about since. She said, "The hardest part wasn't him. The hardest part was realizing that the system isn't broken. It worked exactly the way it was built to work." You didn't know what to say to that. She said she was doing well. She said Phoenix was warmer than she expected. You said you were glad. You hung up and stood outside the hospital for a while before going back inside. You've thought about that call more than you expected to. Not the things she said, though you've thought about those too. More the fact of the call itself, that you made it, that she answered, that you both said things carefully, the way people do when they're trying to be decent to each other across a distance that isn't really closable. You've asked yourself what you wanted from that call. You've given yourself a few different answers. The honest one, the one you arrived at maybe 2 years later, is that you wanted to know she didn't blame you. And she told you she didn't, and you took that and moved on. But you've wondered since whether she was being kind rather than accurate, whether she gave you the answer that let both of you get off the phone without prolonging something painful, rather than the answer that was fully true. You'll never know. That call is what it was. It's done. Closing, you say. The team shifts. The anesthesiologist starts adjusting. In 12 minutes, Daniel Voss will be moved to recovery. You tie the last knot. You step back. You look at what you've done, and it looks like every other case you've closed. The circulating nurse asks if you want to dictate the op note now or later. Later, you say. You walk out of the OR and into the scrub sink hallway, and you run the water and you wash your hands the way you always do. 20 seconds, working between each finger, up past the wrist. You dry off and you lean against the wall for a moment and you stare at the ceiling. He's alive. You made him alive. You're going to go home. You're going to sit in your car for a few minutes before you drive. You're going to try to decide how you feel. And standing in this hallway at 4:49 in the morning, you're circling something you still can't name. You think about the Hippocratic tradition, not the oath, which most surgeons take in some modern variation and rarely think about again. The tradition underneath it, the idea, going back centuries, that the healer's obligation doesn't ask who deserves healing. You've always believed that. You've taught it to residents. You've said it in lectures and meant it. Tonight, you found out whether you actually meant it or whether you just meant it when it was easy. You don't know if you're a good person who did the right thing. You don't know if the right thing is the same as the good thing. You don't know if saving someone who caused real permanent damage to another person makes you ethical, or if it makes you complicit in the idea that some people are too protected to face consequences. What you know is that Nadia Karim was brilliant and she left, and Daniel Voss is in recovery, and you are standing in a hallway at 4:49 a.m. with clean hands and no verdict. You walked into this building tonight knowing who was on that table. You saved him anyway. If you made it to the end of this, you're not someone who needs easy answers. You're someone who can sit with a question that doesn't close cleanly. That's the only kind of question worth asking. If you want another dilemma that'll keep you up tonight, that video's on screen now.